May 53, before our era. The sun bleeds across the horizon of northern Mesopotamia, a merciless orb of white-hot iron. Below, the plains, stretching towards the city of Kerhe, are already shimmering with heat, the air thick with dust and the scent of parched earth. Hidden within a shallow wadi, a depression carved by long-dead rivers, lies Arash, a scout of the House of Surin. He and his 20 horsemen are motionless, their forms blending with the dun-colored rock and scrub. Only the occasional flick of a horse's ear or the glint of a bronze scale on their lamellar armor betrays their presence. For days, they have shadowed the great beast lumbering west, the army of the Roman triumvir, Marcus Licinius Crassus. 7 legions, 40,000 men, a river of steel and leather crawling through Parthian lands, dragging a tail of dust that chokes the sky. Arash has seen them from a distance, the relentless, disciplined march, the nightly construction of a perfect fortified rectangle in the middle of nowhere. It is unnatural, it is obscene, but it is also, he has been told, rich. Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, has brought his fortune to buy a new one with Parthian blood. A low hiss from his second-in-command, Phrates, draws his attention. Arash squints, his eyes accustomed to the glare. There, a small smudge of dust, separate from the main column, moving slowly along a tertiary track. Too small to be a legionary cohort, too slow to be a cavalry patrol. It can only be one thing: baggage, a supply detail, lagging behind the main force, vulnerable. Arash raises a hand, 2 fingers extended. The signal ripples silently through his warband. Bows are checked, arrows nocked. The men's faces are grim masks of anticipation. They are hunters, born to the saddle, masters of the hit-and-run tactic that has confounded empires for centuries. Their composite bows, a marvel of sinew and horn, are instruments of death at 300 paces. The Romans, with their short swords and heavy shields, are clumsy infantrymen, tortoises baked in their own shells. The target draws closer. It's a single, heavy wagon, a carus, pulled by 4 straining mules and escorted by a mere dozen legionaries. A decanus, a junior officer, walks beside the lead mule, his bronze helmet reflecting the brutal sunlight. The legionaries look miserable. Their woolen tunics are dark with sweat, their hobnailed sandals kicking up puffs of ochre dust. They carry their heavy shields, their scuta slung over their backs, and their short swords, their gladi, hang idly at their hips. They are tired, complacent, blind to the landscape around them. They see only a wasteland. Arash sees a killing ground. He waits. Let them draw level with the mouth of the wadi. Let the heat sap the last of their vigilance. The creak of the wagon's wooden wheels becomes a rhythmic groan, a funeral dirge they cannot yet hear. Arash tastes the dust on his tongue, feels the familiar tension in his shoulders. He glances at Phrates, who gives a slow, predatory nod. It is time. Arash gives a sharp, bird-like whistle. In an instant, the silent wadi explodes into a storm of motion and sound. 20 horsemen surge up the dusty incline, their horses' hooves thundering against the hard-packed earth. Before the first Roman can even turn his head, the air is filled with the high-pitched shriek of Parthian arrows. The dreaded Parthian shot is not just a parting volley. It is a way of life, an opening statement. Arrows thud into shields, into the wooden sides of the wagon, and into soft flesh. 2 legionaries go down without a sound, pincushions of feathered death. The decanus shouts a warning, cut short as an arrow punches through his gorget. He clutches his throat, gargling on his own blood, and collapses. The Romans react with the drilled instinct of their training, forming a clumsy circle around the wagon, their shields interlocking. But they are too few. Arash and his men wheel around them, a whirlwind of horse and bow, never offering a stationary target. They pour arrow after arrow into the beleaguered knot of infantry, a relentless, stinging rain. A mule, struck in the flank, screams and goes down, tangling its harness. The wagon lurches to a halt. This is not a battle. It is a slaughter. In less than 5 minutes, it is over. The last Roman slumps against a wheel, his shield bristling with arrows, his gladius still clutched in his hand. Silence returns to the plains, broken only by the snorting of the Parthian horses and the buzzing of flies already gathering on the dead. Arash dismounts, his bow still in hand, and approaches the wagon. Phraates is grinning, wiping blood from a nick on his cheek. "A gift from the gods, Arash. Gold for Serena and Roman steel for us." Arash nods, his eyes fixed on the large canvas-covered prize. Treasure? Plunder? The personal baggage of some wealthy legate, perhaps? Or a pay chest for the legions? He rips back the heavy canvas, his heart pounding with the thrill of victory and the promise of riches. But as the harsh sunlight floods the wagon's interior, his triumphant smile falters. There are no chests of gold coins, no silver goblets, no silks from the west. Instead, the wagon is packed to the roof with something far more baffling. Sacks, wooden crates, and sealed clay jars, all stacked with a frustrating geometric precision. Phraates spits on the ground, his earlier elation curdling into disgust. "Grain," he snarls, kicking at a tightly bound sack. A small puff of flour-like dust escapes. "And vinegar water? We risk our necks against Crassus's dogs for rations a goat would refuse." The other men murmur in agreement, their hands leaving the hilts of their swords. The thrill of the hunt was gone, replaced by the mundane reality of logistics. The wagon was not a treasure chest. It was a pantry. But Arash remains silent, his gaze sweeping over the contents with an unsettling intensity. It isn't the what that holds his attention, but the how. He runs a hand over a stack of wooden crates, each one identical in size and construction. He points to a small wooden tag tied to the draw rope of a sack. "Varam," he calls, his voice low. An older scout, a man whose face is a road map of desert campaigns, dismounts and approaches. Varam had spent years trading horses along the borderlands of Syria. He knew the strange scratchings of the Westerners. Varam squints at the tag. On its surface are letters burned into the wood. He traces them with a calloused finger. "Leg 4, he says slowly, sounding out the foreign shapes. "Cohort 6. Century 2. He looks up at Arash, his brow furrowed. It is a designation. 4th Legion, the 6th Cohort, the 2nd Century. A quiet falls over the men. Phraates scoffs, but it lacks conviction. They label their sacks of grain. More than that, Varam continues, picking up another tag from a different sack. This one says Legio 4, Cohort 6, 3rd Century. He moves to a sealed amphora, wiping away the dust to reveal painted letters. Posca, he reads, the sour vinegar water drink of the common soldier, and below it, the same meticulous labeling of legion, cohort, and century. It was a distribution system of terrifying specificity. This wasn't just a wagon load of food. It was a precise, calculated delivery intended for specific units, for specific men. Each sack knew its destination. Each jar had a purpose. There was no guesswork, no chaotic scramble for supplies. It was the work of scribes and quartermasters, an unseen army fighting with ledgers and ink. Arash moves deeper into the wagon, prying open one of the heavy crates with the tip of his blade. The lid groans open. Inside, nestled in straw, are not swords or armor, but the tools of a different kind of war. Dozens of shovel heads, the iron spade-like pala. Beside them, a stack of heavy-headed pickaxes, the dolabra, a brutal tool equally capable of digging a ditch or splitting a skull. There are saws, hammers, measuring lines wound onto wooden spools, and heavy leather bags filled with precisely forged iron nails of varying sizes. This was not the baggage of warriors. It was the toolkit of builders, of pioneers. The Romans were not merely passing through this land. They came prepared to dig it up, to reshape it, to own it. They could raise a fortress in a single night with the contents of a few such wagons. In another crate, they find a startling sight. Hundreds of heavy, three-sided iron points. They are pila heads, the lethal tips of the Roman heavy javelin. But there are no wooden shafts. Phraates frowns. Why carry them like this? A useless weight. No, Arash says, picking one up. It is heavy, perfectly balanced. It is efficient. They pack more heads into a small space. The shafts are just wood. They can be made from any tree. But this is Roman iron. Roman death. They carry only the part that matters. At the very back of the wagon, tucked away and protected from the elements, is a long cylindrical case made of cured leather. It is sealed with wax bearing the impression of an eagle. Arash breaks the seal and carefully slides out the contents. Not a battle standard, but a collection of tightly rolled papyrus scrolls. He takes one and slowly, carefully, unrolls it. The scouts crowd around, peering over his shoulder. They see nothing they can understand, yet everything they can recognize. It is a drawing, an intricate diagram of lines and angles, covered in Roman numerals and annotations. But the shape is unmistakable. It is a perfect square, a fortress in miniature, complete with detailed gates, towers, and defensive ditches. It is the blueprint for the very camp the legions build every single night. Another scroll reveals the design for a pontoon bridge, each segment detailed down to the last rope and plank. A third shows a complex wooden machine, a creature of levers and twisted ropes, designed to hurl massive stones, a siege engine. Arash stares at the scroll in his hands, the dry papyrus suddenly feeling heavier than lead. The heat of the Mesopotamian plain seems to vanish, replaced by an icy dread that crawls up his spine. He finally understands. Crassus hadn't brought an army to Parthia. He had brought a mobile city-state, a self-contained universe of war, powered not by courage alone, but by mathematics, by engineering, by a relentless, soul-crushing organization. This wagon, which they had taken for a treasure haul, was infinitely more valuable. It was a page torn from the Roman Book of Conquest, and it told a terrifying story of an enemy that left nothing, absolutely nothing, to chance. The scouts fell into a profound and uneasy silence. The sun beat down on the carnage, on the dead Romans whose discipline had failed to save them, and on the Parthians whose victory now felt hollow and strangely insignificant. The blueprints in Arash's hands seemed to radiate a cold logic that was more menacing than any war cry. This was not the chaotic, personality-driven warfare of the East, where a great king or a charismatic general inspired his horsemen to glorious charges. This was something else entirely. It was impersonal, methodical, and inevitable. "Burn it," Phrates says, his voice a low growl. He gestures towards the wagon with his sword. "Burn it all. This is an evil thing. Sorcery." Some of the younger scouts nod, their eyes wide. They look from the intricate diagrams to the identically labeled sacks, and it is clear they agree. This level of order was unnatural. It felt like a violation of the wild, untamed spirit of the plains, the very spirit that gave the Parthian horseman his strength. To them, war was a storm, violent, unpredictable, a thing of passion and courage. The contents of this wagon suggested that to the Romans, war was a problem of engineering, to be solved with tools and calculations. But Arash shakes his head, carefully rolling the papyrus scroll and sliding it back into its leather case. "No," he says, his voice firm, cutting through the rising tide of superstition. "We do not burn it. We take it." He looks from face to face, his gaze lingering on each man. Serena must see this. The King of Kings must understand what is marching towards Ctesiphon. Vahram, the old scout, nods slowly in agreement. The boy is right. A sword can be broken. A man can be killed. But this... He gestures to the wagon, its contents now exposed like the entrails of a dissected beast. This is a different kind of weapon. It is the mind of our enemy. To burn it would be to blind ourselves. The men are still hesitant. The idea of hauling this strange cargo of grain sacks, iron parts, and paper scrolls back across the desert seems a bizarre anticlimax to their raid. They had dreamt of gold, and instead were being handed an education. But Arash's authority, earned through a dozen successful raids, holds sway. He gives the orders, his voice crisp and decisive once more. The bodies of the Romans are stripped of their armor and weapons. Practical, familiar loot. The gladii are fine blades, the chainmail shirts surprisingly flexible. These are things they understand. They unhitch the dead mule and tether 2 of their own horses to the wagon. It is a slow, clumsy process. The vehicle is heavy, its wheels designed for Roman roads, not the shifting sands of Mesopotamia. As they work, Arash conducts a final, more thorough search. He finds a small leather satchel on the body of the Decanus. Inside there is no money, only a wax tablet and a stylus. He hands it to Varam, who studies the scratches on its dark surface. "It is a tele," Varam reports after a moment. "A list. He counts everything. 10 sacks of frumentum, wheat, 5 amphorae of posca, 20 shovel heads, 50 pounds of nails, size alpha." He trails off, looking up at Arash. He even counted the nails. The detail is so mundane, it is breathtaking. This junior officer, moments from his death, was responsible not for fighting, but for accounting. His weapon was not his sword, but his inventory. His shield was his ledger. It dawns on Arash with chilling clarity that every single man in the Roman army, from the legate down to the lowest mule driver, was a cog in a vast and intricate machine. The legionary fought, the engineer built, the quartermaster counted, and each one performed his task with the same unwavering, relentless discipline. As the sun begins its descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the plains, the small procession begins its slow journey east. The Parthian scouts, masters of speed and surprise, are now burdened by the very system they sought to plunder. The captured wagon, with its groaning wheels, dictates their pace. It is a bitter irony. They set out as wolves and were returning as mule drivers, hauling a cargo that felt more like a curse than a prize. Arash rides beside the wagon, the leather tube containing the blueprints now slung across his own back. He cannot shake the images from his mind, the perfect geometry of the camp, the precise mechanics of the siege engine, the meticulous labels on every single item. He thinks of the Parthian way of war, the great nobles who answer the king's call, bringing their personal retainers, their own arms and supplies. Their strength was in their individual prowess, their fierce loyalty to their lord, their unmatched skill in the saddle. But they were also disorganized, prone to infighting, and reliant on swift victories. A long campaign was a logistical nightmare. He now knows that the Romans have solved that nightmare. They did not rely on luck or individual heroism. They relied on the shovel, the saw, the abacus, and the blueprint. They did not conquer territory. They consumed and digested it, turning it into a fortress, a road, a supply depot. They were an army of ants, each with its own task, devouring the world one carefully measured bite at a time. The 40,000 men under Crassus were merely the jaws of the beast. The true strength, the true terror, lay in the methodical, unthinking, unstoppable system that fed and armed them. Arash looks back towards the west, where the dust cloud of the main Roman army still hangs on the horizon. For the first time, he feels not the hunter's thrill, but the cold, creeping fear of the prey. 3 days later, the small, dust-caked procession reached the main Parthian encampment. It was a sprawling, chaotic city of felt yurts, horse lines, and the colorful banners of a dozen noble houses, all gathered under the supreme command of Surena, the Grand Marshal of Parthia. The contrast with the ghost image of the Roman camp blueprint seared into Arash's mind could not have been more stark. Here, energy and life pulsed in a vibrant, disorganized sprawl. There, in the Roman ideal, was the cold, dead perfection of a grid. News of the scouts' return had preceded them, but the story had become twisted in the telling. Rumor whispered that they had captured Crassus's personal pay chest. As Arash and his men guided the lumbering Roman wagon through the camp, they were met with curious and expectant stares. Warriors, merchants, and camp followers paused to watch the strange prize roll by. When it became clear the wagon held not gold, but grain and tools, the initial excitement curdled into mockery and disappointment. Shouts and jeers followed them. "Did you bring us Roman bread to eat?" one cataphract bellowed. "Or will we build them a new road to our capital?" Arash ignored them, his face a stony mask. He knew the contents of the wagon were more significant than any treasure, but it was a truth that was hard to see and harder to explain. He led his men and their bizarre prize directly to the command pavilion, a vast expanse of embroidered silk and heavy carpets at the center of the camp. Guards bearing the Surin family standard, a depiction of the mythical Simurgh, stepped aside, their expressions a mixture of confusion and deference. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of incense and oiled leather. Serena, a man barely 30 years of age but already a legend, sat upon a pile of cushions, surrounded by his advisors, a collection of grizzled clan chiefs and sharp-eyed strategists. He was handsome in the severe Parthian way, with a neatly trimmed black beard and eyes that missed nothing. He did not rise as Arash entered and knelt, but his gaze was sharp and questioning. "Arash," Serena said, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of steel. "The camp buzzes with the tale of your great prize. They say you struck a blow against the Roman purse. Show me this tribute." With a deep breath, Arash began his report. He spoke not of gold, but of wooden tags and inventory lists. He described the precise labeling of the sacks for individual centuries within cohorts, the prefabricated parts for weapons and tools, the sheer, mind-numbing orderliness of it all. As he spoke, a murmur of disbelief and then disappointment rippled through the assembled chieftains. One, a portly lord from the east, snorted audibly. "He brings us an accountant's ledger, my lord Serena. The Romans will die of boredom before they die of our arrows." Serena silenced him with a flick of his hand, his eyes never leaving Arash's face. He listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Arash finished describing the material contents, he paused, then slowly unslung the leather tube from his back. "This," he said, his voice dropping, "is the true prize." He walked forward and, kneeling before Serena, carefully unrolled the papyrus scrolls on a low table. The Parthian lords leaned in, their expressions shifting from disdain to bewilderment. They saw the alien script, the precise lines drawn with an architect's care. They saw the schematics for the fortress, the bridge, the stone thrower. "It is their camp," Arash explained, pointing to the largest diagram. "The one they build every night. This is how they do it. Not through memory or skill alone, but with a plan, a formula. Any group of their soldiers anywhere in the world can build this same fortress if they have this drawing. It is a fortress they carry on paper." For the first time, Serena's composure showed a flicker of change. He leaned forward, his fingers tracing the lines of the drawn ramparts and ditches. He looked at the details of the siege engine, a machine designed for one purpose, to tear down the walls of Parthian cities. He saw the cold, brutal mathematics of conquest. This wasn't the plan for a single battle. It was a repeatable, scalable system for subjugating an entire continent. The Romans didn't just bring soldiers. They brought a portable, weaponized version of their civilization. He picked up the Decanus' wax tablet which Varam had cleaned. He saw the neat columns of figures, the tally of nails and shovels. He looked from the grand strategy of the blueprint to the minute detail of the inventory, and in that moment, he understood what Arash had seen in the desert. He saw the totality of the Roman war machine. Serena finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over his assembled lords. Their faces now showed not mockery, but a dawning, sober comprehension. The laughter was gone, replaced by a tense silence. "This scout," Serena announced, his voice ringing with authority, "has brought us something more valuable than 1,000 talents of gold. He has brought us a glimpse into our enemy's soul. And it is a soul made not of passion, but of gears and numbers." He turned back to Arash. "You have done well. You have shown us that we are not fighting men. We are fighting an idea of order, of relentless logic, an idea that crushes everything in its path." He stood up, a new fire in his eyes. "And it is an idea that must be broken here, on these plains, before it reaches the heart of our empire. We will not let them build their paper fortresses in our lands. We will turn the desert into their graveyard." The contents of the wagon had not brought wealth, but clarity. And with clarity came purpose. The real battle was about to begin.